Yes, average bro Dana Stevens here in Patterson, New Jersey, saxophone player and amateur thinker.
I'm Peter Stoltzman. I'm here in Denver, and you can find me as Peter John Stoltzman everywhere on the web. And I play the piano. Oh gosh.
I'm Lucas Vesely. Hello, Peter. Hello, Dana. I am a musician out here in California, and you can also find me on the internet as Lucas Brian Vesely.
All right, and we are very excited to have a guest with us today, Natalie Montoya, also from the Bay Area. Natalie, can you give us a little personal introduction?
I play jazz bass and I started about a couple years ago. My favorite bassist would probably be Sam Jones or Ben Tucker or Wilbur Ware, maybe, but it's hard to choose. Um, I do not go to college. I'm not a music major. All I really do to learn jazz is just transcribing and like hearing other people play and going to like other people's gigs.
That's the real school.
Yeah, you stole my words.
Sorry. It is. That's what I tell all my students in colleges and high schools. Tell them the real school is the music, whether it's being played or on a recording. If you can learn it and you watch it, that's it, man. That's basically all I tell people to do: is transcribe, learn tunes, transcribe, and and come play with me, and we play and we talk about it. What's different from that and what you're doing? I mean, yeah, I have some worksheets, I guess, that I hand out sometimes. Practice this stuff in 12 keys. It could get a little more organized, I guess. But
School in jazz, I should say learning in jazz comes in many forms. And there's quite a lot of players who did not go through jazz education, who were my heroes and our heroes. So yeah, that's awesome. Wilbur Ware, I am really fascinated by that by that particular influence. I love Wilbur Ware. And actually, I don't know if you know Ben Street at all.
No, I haven't personally met him.
Yeah, but he's he's the one that made. I like Wilbur Ware before, but yeah, Ben's also, and I think he dabbled in college and then was like, yeah, cool. But anyway, yeah. So speaking of jazz, where are we going?
yeah, Natalie, I don't want to necessarily project any assumptions on topics that you want to talk about, but the obvious, just to name the elephant in the room, is women in jazz, right? And what it's like to be a female, and particularly like you're experiencing this. You're 21, so you're experiencing this like coming up, through the world of jazz now. You've been to New York and played in some sessions and hung out with some cats, and you're playing gigs in the Bay Area and whatnot. So you have a raw perspective on this. You're not like looking back on when back when I was in my 20s, like I am
right now.
So
stop it, Peter.
If you would like to, maybe you could just tell us some of your experience I know that we had circulated the Sasha Berliner open letter. Have you read that? Was that?
Yeah, I think like what struck me more is just people's responses and not necessarily like the article itself, but just knowing certain people like in my community and how they feel about it and how it's a little surprising, I think.
I didn't get a chance to. I read the first couple paragraphs. Unfortunately, I thought we were reading later, and I had time. And I do. I personally know Ethan and Robert, but and I remember that whole thing. Well, I'm always late to things like that, so I was like 6 months or a year behind. But I do remember reading that article and a little bit of Ethan's response. Anyway, can you maybe summarize Sasha's perspective?
So the whole article basically, like her jumping off point were those comments, but it generally was just a whole open letter to the jazz community about her experiences being very young, like 16, going to Club Deluxe, sitting in or being hired there, and just people being like older musicians being, I think she used the word harassing, and just like she felt like she couldn't tell them to like fuck off, because then it would be like, how am I gonna get this gig, you know?
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, she tells stories of her experience in school as well.
Yeah.
Matt Wilson, I think, was directing her ensemble at the
New school.
Was the new school, and
I think so.
and he was always cool. And then they brought in a sub, and that sub was just like really out of line. He was like praising the drummer and telling the drummer to play louder and more, and then with Sasha, he was like just kind of the absolute opposite, and like and being condescending about her abilities, and like asking, like, do you know how to play an F blues, and that kind of thing. And she's at the new school, like she's pretty badass,
probably.
And it's like, and then like, I think there are several experiences she outlines there, that I can't tell the whole story of everything, but one of the dynamics that really rings for me is the thing of like, okay, everybody's witnessing this in the moment, and has space afterwards to potentially like talk about it, acknowledge it, maybe call out some of what had happened, or at least name it, and ask her, like how she's doing, or offer support or whatever, right? And nobody says anything ever, right? It's just silent, like, okay, that's what happened. And then Sasha has to, she has to not only deal with the fallout, the emotional fallout, and the social fallout from that experience, but she doesn't get any acknowledgement or support from the people who witnessed it.
Her bandmates or her classmates.
Exactly. Yeah.
Who are, I'm guessing, all male. I'm guessing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So nobody's saying, "Hey, that was fucked up." I like, whatever. Just, like, can we start from there? Like an acknowledgement that wasn't cool. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of that for women in jazz, and I'm curious, Natalie, if you've experienced that dynamic of like shit going down that was not cool and it was obvious, and then nobody's just like at the very least acknowledging what's going on.
Yeah. I haven't really had an experience that I can remember where someone was being really condescending to me, and I felt like it was because like I was a girl in jazz. But there was one time I was at another jazz musician's birthday party, and I was like one of the last people left, like all dudes, and it was like 6 people left, and then I was like gonna go to the bathroom, and then I was gonna head out. And then when I got back, everyone was gone except for the host. And I was like, that's weird, they were just here. And then he walked me out because I was gonna leave, and they were all like standing on the porch, just like laughing their heads off. And it was because like they wanted to give him space because they thought something was going to happen between us, even though he's more than twice my age. I'm like, it's just like, really? And they're like all older than me too, and they know like better. And no one like did anything.
Worse, they were like willing accomplices in this like attempt to get him a chance to hook up with you.
Yeah.
And that hookup, just by the nature of the age, is kind of gross.
Yeah.
And secondly, by the fact that like you didn't come there for a date, you came there for a jazz party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure. Actually, what was weird is, I had been in a long relationship with a saxophone player, and so for like the first year I was playing jazz, I was pretty shielded because I never had to deal with like men, because they just knew, you know, I was off limits. And then when I broke up with him, it all like came at me at once. I couldn't go to like a club without, or like a jam session without things happening. And that person that I talked about, he had started hanging out with me, and I thought, oh, cool. Like, you know, there's an interest in music here, and we can like, you know, go to sessions and talk about music. But the entire time, like all his friends knew that he was just like trying to fuck me the entire time. And that like he was just going after me like full speed after I was single.
Natalie, can you help us just understand on a deeper level? I don't want to immediately put you in a totally uncomfortable place, so feel free to just put whatever boundary you want to put on this conversation. But I think it's easy to like take a story like this and then start looking at both sides, right? I would really like to understand more about like what the ramifications of that are for you, like personally and professionally, if you feel, you know, like it affects your world or your life.
Yeah, it's just like added bullshit you have to deal with. Like you just want to play music, and then you have to wonder like, oh, do these people say like good things about me just because of how I look, or like, you know, they're just like, they don't actually think I'm talented. They only like remember me because I'm a girl or something.
Yeah, it's like you don't know how authentic they are.
Yeah.
And that's we all want to be seen for who we are authentically, and that's man, that's a problem.
And at the very least, it's just very annoying. Like, I don't want to go to like a session with a bunch of other jazz musicians and have like it in the back of my mind. Like, I have to keep my guard up all the time. And, you know, people will say like comments that are probably like not necessary, that I should probably call them out on, but I just don't, because it's like, if I do, then there would be a lot of awkwardness, and it would be more like shit for me to have to deal with them than if I just were quiet.
Is there someone in, well, I guess Lukash, but other than Lukash that maybe like not, I mean, not a boyfriend obviously, but like a dude that you hang with that gets what we're talking about here, that you can hang out with and go to sessions with, and like,
it's not a douchebag.
My teacher. My teacher, Eric Markowitz.
Oh, yeah, he's great. Yeah, I would imagine that. Yeah.
And Jay.
You know, Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool.
And so there's like this bubble where I feel kind of protected, but I mean, it's not, it doesn't necessarily make a difference.
Wow. doesn't make a difference. That's not a small statement there. That is not a small statement.
I mean, it makes you feel less alone, but it's the shit still happens to you, and you still have to deal with it.
Based on the conversations that like Iverson had with Robert Glasper, I mean, the way that they are talking, about, or not about women, but they're using these, analogies to, like, you talked about the clitoris in this conversation. I can understand how, like, there's just this mentality that's baked into the history, right? And it's like, I was talking to this girl I went out with, and she's of African American descent, and she says there's like a real big problem in, like, when she grew up in, like, the community, in her African American community, where there's like this subtle sense of chauvinism, inside of the, she dealt with that a lot, and it's not a racial thing, but I mean, it's definitely seems like it's been part of the culture, of the last century. Unfortunately, whether or not, these jazz musicians now, contemporary jazz musicians, are kind of identifying it, because it's hard to identify, because you're just going along an evolution, right? An evolutionary pattern. So it's just kind of like you're going with the flow. So in that sense, I'm not trying to, cover up what they're saying or try to justify it in any way, but you can see how there's a root to where it's coming from, unfortunately.
I think you're right on, man. It's cultural, and that culture is, I mean, to name it, it's a male culture, right? And it's a heterosexual male culture, which sexualizes and objectifies women, right? And that's the matrix of that, this, like, the historical and societal matrix that holds that culture in place and perpetuates it is super deep, man. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of like male dominated culture and
10 millennia, dude.
Yeah, man.
10, 11 millennia.
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, yeah.
Since the advent of agriculture, we talked about that last week. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the propertization. I'm making up words again, of women, right? And so, and then, like, I'm listening to this podcast, Seen on Radio, and they're talking through a lot of the history, and it's it's deep, man, because there are, like, notches in history when things maybe could have changed, but people in power kept the dynamics the way they were. And so, that, like, now at 2021, we are, like, by far the most, like, enlightened and the most, like, challenging and breaking apart the grid that I'm talking about, right? That matrix that we've been in as long as the eye can see back in history, right? And so, like, that's cool. And still, right, you're having this experience of being, like, sexualized everywhere you go, especially in the world of jazz, and, like, it's totally male dominated. And so you're like, like you said, it doesn't even matter, right? That there are, like, ally men, there are safe men, there are men who maybe even are, like, calling each other out sometimes, and trying to break down the culture. There are institutions like Stanford Jazz Workshop right near you that are, like, hiring 50% women on their faculty. Like, that's a structural, like, commitment that they've made. But these things, we think about how many hundreds of thousands of years that these kind of grids have been in place. It's going to take generations upon generations to break it down too, probably. So it's, I mean, in the meantime, right, the question is then, like, what do we do? How do we, what do we do?
I think calling out other people helps, but you can't really like attack them, you have to do it in a very certain way, you know, like you're walking on eggshells, because if you don't, then they might just kind of retaliate and kind of buckle down on what they were doing, and no, I wasn't doing anything wrong, you know, type thing. And also just the culture, like it's just whole kind of, I don't know if I want to call it a boys club, but there's kind of that vibe. It's like when I'm hanging with people, I've gotten told like, oh man, you're not even like a woman, you're like one of the guys. And I'm supposed to be like flattered by that, because I basically let them get away with saying like objectifying shit to like women who are walking by, you know, and I just don't care to even get into it. But like it seems like there's this culture where if you're being PC, or you're, you know, just being kind of a decent human being, you're being like a pussy, you know, is what
you mean for guys, if they're being a decent human being, you're saying, or for
like
in general?
Like no, just in these specific people, like people who objectify other people. Like if another guy there would have told that dude like, man, that's not cool, you know, and then they would probably say, wow, you're just a pussy. For, you know, that's not a big deal, you can't take a joke, you know.
Yeah, I've unfortunately been that guy, but you know, I don't care. It's I mean, someone's got to do it. I remember being in a room with some, I'll just say some players I admire, and remember this whole phenomenon of, I hate to even have these words come out of my mouth, but Girls Gone Wild. This was like an infomercial all the time at night, and it was after a gig, and we were in a hotel room, and that came on, and these guys were like, woo, woo. I'm like, guys, what the fuck is this shit? And yeah, it got really awkward, and then I eventually left. But like, come on, like, I don't know. It's just. So yeah, so there's definitely things that obviously. Well, it just, man, this is such a big bowl of mess. I mean, I don't even.
It's weird because in New York, I don't remember feeling this way, but maybe it's because I don't. But then here, I don't know if it's just specifically this one like little scene, or I don't know.
It's certain scenes, like individual. It does happen in New York. It happens everywhere, honestly. In Canada, I mean, I can think of examples literally everywhere. But the question I'm wondering, or the thing I start to wonder is, I'm trying to think of other, not genres, but other walks of life, other fields. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. Where it's male dominated, and do we see a similar? Well, I
politics.
Well,
100%.
Right. I dated a engineer, nuclear scientist, actually, in Paris, who was, I mean, always the only woman there, and she had an authoritative position as well. So the kind of push, you know, just the snide remarks and you know, the men felt uncomfortable being governed, or you know, having a manager as a woman, and she has a very at this point she's immune to, I mean, her whole life through schooling, because there's not many women in science, you know what I mean, and engineering. Yep. And she's really, really talented, obviously, to get to where she was. And she dealt with this all the time, but by the time I met her in her late 30s, I mean, she didn't take shit, man. Like, she would call these guys out, and to the point where she did it humorously and embarrassingly towards them. Like, she had a way of like calling them out and almost, you know, in an embarrassing way. I remember being just even out in public when, French guys are, let's not talk about that too much, but French guys are French guys, and we'll be in public and, they'll be hitting on her. I'm even there, and I don't know what she said because I don't know French, but I understood the reaction, and it was handled, But that, again, she's like twice your age, and she knew how to. Anyway.
If she had gotten to a place of power too,
right? And you're right. Although obviously that wasn't that was difficult as well. But I'm wondering. What I'm saying. I don't know how useful it is to say, but I'm wondering if it's a real it's a male female thing that becomes exaggerated, exacerbated, is that a word? In situations where it's male dominated. On the other hand, I should say, as someone who's been in situations where it's the opposite, where I'm like the only guy in the room, I'm not gonna cry wolf and all this shit and be, what I should say is that objectification happens when there's a majority versus a minority of any, like, even if I'm the only black person. I remember, dude, I just had this thought when we were in college. I was in this wedding band, and we played this wedding band gig, and I'm in the I go to the bathroom, okay, and this white guy, maybe he had a drink, I don't know what the deal was, but he was next to me in the urinal, and he's saying, "Man, I bet you have a big dick." And I was like, what the fuck? I almost wanted to punch the shit out of this guy. I couldn't believe that came out of his mouth. But there it is. A black guy, not in the only black guy there, actually. And this guy comes in the bathroom and objectifies me for my fucking, So I'm wondering, the strategy that's going to be effective in this situation in jazz, maybe we need to look at other strategies that have worked in that kind of situation before and adopt them. I mean, going back to what you said, Peter, how do we effectively address this? How do we effectively address this?
We're going to have to tackle micro macro again, right?
Well, Jesus Christ.
It is, man, because it's like, the most effective way is micro, is with your buddy who says something that's a little bit beyond, or whatever, and you can have like a real totally cool conversation about it and be like, you know what, man, this is like, that word or that way of talking about women is, can be really hurtful, man. Actually, like, I know, we're just in a car and we're talking and we're buds and it seems like it's not a big deal, but this is a thing that we, as guys, we got to be careful about, because there are real consequences for women. And when you think about, like, the anger, right, that welled up in you when this guy just like called out your dick size, like, but it wasn't about him saying, your dick size per se. It was about the racial dynamic,
the objectification of black men.
Yeah,
quite honestly.
And so, like, all that comes.
We were humans until he said that.
Exactly. We got to think about that as men when we interact with women too. Is that it's not just like two people just talking shit. It's like there's a dynamic there that's bigger than that. And when you say something that then does objectify, like, a woman, to be specific, then what's going on for them, right? It's going to bring up a bunch of anger. It's going to bring up that kind of like isolation, and then the expectation is that they just need to stuff it. right? Stuff all those feelings, become inauthentic, and just be like immune to it.
And then, as we know from Gabor Mate, as soon as you pick safety over inauthenticity, or excuse me, as soon as you pick safety over authenticity, you're creating trauma. You're creating trauma.
And so we really need to think about that as a community of men, as a culture of men, of maleness. You know, we are participants in that community and that culture, each one of us, that like we when we do those things or say those things and expect women to just whatever, acquiesce and take it, that we are creating trauma, basically. And this is, you know, maybe it's microaggressions, maybe it's micro traumas, but these things build up, man.
Yeah, well, I'm not,
and we shouldn't. Like, I don't think we should excuse it. Go ahead, Natalie.
Compounded like trauma. It's like I think for a lot of people, it's just it keeps building and building and building. So it's not necessarily about like the individual thing right there, but it keeps like it just always keeps going.
The message that it sends to you over tons of incidences and tons of responses from other human beings in different situations. Yeah, I mean, we it's hard to ignore the narrative that the subconscious creates from its experiences, and that's a huge one. I mean, I'm dealing with that. In our own ways, but yeah, I mean, it's I mean, you know, so yes, the micro, I think we all agree. I mean, we at least here in this room know, can clearly see the, you know, we humanize ourselves. We don't want to objectify ourselves. But the thing is, I guess the question is, in the micro, I think, of course, you're correct, man. I mean, the micro is always the one that's the thing that's most in our control.
Yeah, it's
when it gets to the macro, it ends up being one person controlling the macro, you know, direction that they go into and addressing. That's a fucked up sentence. There's one person who's just, you know what I'm saying? There's one person who's trying to dictate where the macro should go, and it's not usually a conversation at that point. And then, you know, and then we get into Thomas Sowell and the constrained response versus the unconstrained response, which I mean is the cure worse than the actual problem, you know? Because humans are bad at creating solutions. I'm sorry. I don't trust humans very well in creating solutions for macros.
You know, there's another dynamic here, if you don't mind me just flipping it. You know, we're talking about kind of like an individual or whatever group, you know, dictating the macro, and then individuals underneath that being like, you know, you're constraining me or whatever, right? And that can be a fucked up dynamic. There's also like a macro thing where individuals who get, and I've been there myself, who get pinned with the macro label of like, for instance, let's say I say, you know, we're on a gig. I say, you know, oh, Natalie, I love your haircut, you know, and that is like, why are you talking about my body? And like, and what are you underneath that? Are you being sexual? Like, do you expect something from me? And, you know, and then like, let's say, you know, then Natalie's like, man, you know, Peter, man, he's sexist, you know?
Never thought, I wouldn't pegged you that way ever. But
no, right?
You know.
No, but you see what I'm saying, right? Like these things happen, right? Where like some seemingly innocent individual behavior or a behavior with, you know, something with the best of intentions, like honestly best of intentions can then can be like connected back to like a kind of this very toxic negative cultural thing, right? And and I know that then is a source of, it's a very sticky place for us being able to work through these issues, because people get defensive when they get lumped into the macro labels, right? When their behavior is one singular behavior in one moment that maybe could get talked about and unraveled, right? But instead they're getting lumped into like a larger thing that they never intended to be part of. Now, I'm not saying that's like an excuse for all behaviors. I'm just saying this is a dynamic we have to deal with, that the defensiveness that comes up when we get lumped into that larger macro narrative of like sexism, chauvinism, male dominance, objectification, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And so I think we just have to like anticipate that feeling of like, when there's a calling out, there's going to be a defensiveness a lot of the time. And I think if anything, like part of the most productive conversation that I want to be part of is like, how do we do this calling out or calling in for people to have the discussion without doing that like macro lumping in a way that's immediately causing more defensiveness, more walls, etc. And Natalie, I mean, you said like, what did you say? Like we have to be careful and like walk on eggshells. I don't really know that's, walking on eggshells is like a red flag for dysfunctional human relationships, right? There's like a book called Walking on Eggshells about people with like, major trauma and issues. And, I don't know that that's a way to progress, really, to walk on eggshells. I think like these conversations have to happen, and there has to be some delicacy or some tact around the like, not just lumping people into like the most negative behavior, the most negative macro narrative, right? Just one more thought. Sorry, I want you to be able to jump in, but like it on the other side of that is like, we can't just walk on eggshells and excuse everything. Because, it's just an individual thing. It's just, he meant well, whatever, it was good intentions. Because when we get in that, then we get in like the culture of just like letting everything be. It's a permissivity, right? Culture of permissivity. And then there's the one out of every 100 dudes who is going to take it way, way, way too far. And it's, it's like, yeah, that's that person's fault and that person's responsibility, but it's also, I think there's a collective cultural responsibility, because if we create a culture of permissivity for general objectification and sexualization of women, then of course somebody's going to take it to its natural, extremes. Right? Whereas if there's cultural collective pressure and expectations of like, hey, check yourself, man, keep your dick in your pants, then, and that's the general vibe, then when somebody's stepping out of, going way out of line, there's a culture of see it, name it, nip it in the bud, like you might see the dude who's predatorily, advancing on somebody over the course of the gig or whatever. And then if the if the collective awareness is there and the collective action is habituated to like calling out and checking people, then maybe that person won't pursue that woman and whatever it is, do something really bad.
There's so much there, Peter.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, man.
I know. Sorry, I talked for a while. Natalie was gonna get in, so I'm curious on your thoughts, and then let's hand it around. I'm gonna shut up.
Well, I use the term walking on eggshells because I'm thinking of like this specific person I know pretty well. And to get him to get the point, because I know that he's actually like a very fragile, sensitive person and he gets offended very easily. You can't just call him out because then he'll probably not want to talk to you for a long time, And so if he were to realize anything beneficial and change any of his actions, it would be, I honestly think it's impossible. But if someone were to try, that's how they would have to do it. They'd have to be really, 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 really careful. And I'm not saying they should, like, people shouldn't have to deal with that. You could just say, like, not cool. Like, maybe you should think, look at yourself in the mirror and think why you're doing that. But I don't think that gets people places, at least certain people.
Do you think they're aware? This person is aware?
Oh, what do you mean?
Of what they're doing, how they're making you feel?
I don't think so. I think that they don't care. They just kind of don't see it, in other people, what they're doing.
I want to argue that they may not know that they're doing it because it's tied to their, and it's I mean, so you can like extend the sexism that happens to like this is a larger cultural problem, obviously. So if it's accepted in greater culture, then obviously, like in the world of music, I mean, obviously sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I used to listen to Motley Crue, and I mean, the way that they, put women, like just sexualize women left and right. I mean, in that style of music is just ridiculous. And it obviously has happened to a certain degree in jazz music, but it's definitely, it sucks, but it's coming from this, this greater influence that culture has, right, on us. And I think people are just conditioned, and they lack the awareness to realize that this may be wrong. And now more people are obviously calling this out, and hopefully it's like having conversations like this is stimulating people's awareness on this subject. So, I'm not trying to defend him in any way, but I can see how he just doesn't have that awareness yet, right, of what's actually going on this micro level.
What's the best way? Let's stick with this human for now. All right. What's the best way to make someone like that aware? Have any of you guys heard of Marshall Rosenberg? You have.
Nonviolent communication.
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking of for some reason right now. Because this is like. Oh, I'm sorry. I just heard the echo.
Yeah. Echo.
And I hate my laugh.
Oh, well, we love your laugh.
Well,
let's just all mute. Except for Dana.
Is it me?
Lucas, mute your mic too. Yeah.
It's Lucas. Anyway, I forgot what I was saying, for Christ's sake.
Marshall Rosenberg.
Yeah, thank you. And I really like his approach. I haven't checked him out it's been a few years, but his approach, I mean, he's someone who's been able to get Israelis and Palestinians to get at the table and talk and have like, at least on a citizen level, not obviously with the government, because the government is just fucked up anywhere you live on the planet Earth. But on a citizenry level, we'll talk about that later, Peter. Stuff. On a citizenry level, he's been able to make some real breakthroughs and build some real communities between Palestinians and Israelis with this concept of non-violent communication, of acknowledging grievances in a way, but also when talking about your own grievances, making sure that you're really speaking to how you feel, how it's making you feel, a particular whatever the offense may be. I don't know how this. I don't know this person. I probably know this person, but I don't know who we're talking about. Which is, I think that's important to keep it that way for now, because but I'm just curious how you think being straight up, like just serious, not necessarily angry, and maybe even in a moment, maybe it isn't even a moment where something bad is happening, but if you were to say, there's these moments where I feel, or, excuse me, I feel, maybe it isn't in the moment, but I feel objectified. And just that statement by itself.
Actually,
talk to me. Tell me why that doesn't. There's probably a reason why that doesn't work, but talk to me, Peter.
Well, so if you say I feel objectified, you're still like lumping that person into that macro narrative, right? You're saying you're not actually saying you're feeling. You're saying what they're doing. They're objectifying you, right? So the nonviolent communication way would be be when you said,
right,
I like your haircut. I felt uncomfortable because I wasn't sure, what your intentions were. And and it just, it touches a nerve for me based on my experience. Right. And then the second thing is to like say, a need. Right. So like you state your feeling and then you state a need. So like, I need you, to just like, if you not comment on my body and my physical appearance. Let's talk about jazz musicians. Let's talk about the weather. Let's talk about whatever, but I need you to not talk about my body. So that would be like a.
So I'm curious what the
kind of NVC.
Lucas, maybe you know the person, but I'm curious how you maybe it's not even useful to ask this question, but I'm curious what you think their response would be to something like that. Like just like straightforward, and it's not accusatory. It doesn't even mention them at all. And I mean, would they have the compassion as a human being to listen and hear that fully?
Yeah, Natalie, what do you think? I mean, you know the person, so I mean, it depends on who it is ultimately, right?
Yeah, I unfortunately can think of like a group of musicians in my head who would have the same reaction, but the person would probably have the reaction of, man, kids these days are just snowflakes. Like you can't say anything, you can't compliment anyone, like basically you're just pussy. Like I guess I can't say anything to her now. Can't talk to her now. She's not cool anymore.
How old is this person? You don't mind me asking?
50s, probably 40s.
Okay,
not that old.
And that's professionally risky for you, right? I mean, that really is.
And it's just like I feel like I shouldn't have to deal with that shit. I don't want to have to be. It's not my job,
Yeah, of course not.
Yep.
But there are also more people even my age I know share the same sentiment. Like, wow, you can't say anything to women now, because they don't know the line. They're not like capable emotionally to like have enough like empathy to see where the other person's at, to where they're just like, oh yeah, I can feel like I shouldn't say that. They feel like they have all these rules around them,
That's what my point is, like, what is acceptable kind of dialogue? Like, when is it offensive? Like if somebody comments on your hair, let's say, like, is that offensive? Or obviously on your body or whatever, like there's certain like red flag, but like saying you look very nice today, or you did your hair up nice, or I don't know, like, so where is the, like, because I mean the
Personally,
culture's, yeah.
Personally for me, that doesn't bother me, but like if you talk about my like clothes, whatever, like I like fashion, I like to wear dresses, but that I don't really care about. But when people start talking about like, oh, you're really like filling out, or something like that, like, or commenting on your boobs, just like,
do you think that's, I mean,
seriously,
obviously
people have done that?
general thing, yeah, that,
I mean, it doesn't have to do with jazz, but I've like been groped at bars and like, but like to me it's like, for jazz I don't want to have, like, this is the one space that I shouldn't have to deal with this shit in, because we're all there for hopefully the same thing, just to play.
Yeah, that's a problem. I mean, that's part of the problem. I mean, that's interesting you say that. I mean, I think in a lot of fields, there's a lot of leakage.
Yeah.
From the locker room, if you will, into everyday life, or the bar, or whatever, and there's no, on a macro, any level, there's not much stated. I mean, well, we're talking about the boundaries, right? We're talking about the boundaries, but there's a lot of. I mean, how do you? I'm thinking of Anand Giridharadas again. How do you deal with the still waking, or those who refuse to be awakened? How do you go about that? The strategy is where I'm lost, because the problem is clear, and it also goes to everyone is sensitive towards, and I mean, my general rules, there are certain comments unless I'm really comfortable with a person, I'm just not gonna go there. I'm just, and there's a rapport established, where we, I mean, we know how to feel, and I think, we know when we're in a position of power or not, and we need to, not to take it to fucking Spider-Man, but with great power comes great responsibility. These motherfuckers should be knowing that shit. I mean, this is in superhero movies, for Christ's sake. How?
I think the dialogue between men and women should be like personally, I feel like it's inherent in like my ethics. I think it all comes from like personal ethics, how you've been raised, what rules, ethics, morals your parents raised you with, and that's ultimately men and women. Obviously, when they talk to each other, like, it's ridiculous how dirty they probably are. I mean, this is,
well.
Can we not assume that?
That's within an established relationship, though. That's
right, friends.
We're talking about, when you're in public, you're in public.
So there should be,
and the thing is about the jazz world too. I'm sorry to cut you off, Lucas, but in the jazz world, it is an actual community. It's like a church community. You know what I'm saying? Communities build for multitude of reasons, but the weird thing about it is we also make our living at it, and that's where it gets really dicey. I'm not going to say religious folks don't make money off their religion, but anyway. But what I'm saying is, the intention of the religion is really to bring people together. It's not to be a business, although it is. But but for music, it's a little bit, it's a community. It's like when you're on the gig. I mean, it's weird. I'm here in New York, and there's guys I maybe haven't seen in 10 years or even talked to, but then we get on the gig, and it's like, we actually do have a shared experience. It's years ago, but there's a sense. And then when that mixes, when there's that dynamic of single people, or not even single people half the time, then some of these guys are married, But when there's the dynamic of gender, so I guess
horny people.
Yeah, well,
Dynamic
I'm gonna be honest.
people.
I've seen this go the other way as well. It's just obviously for obvious reasons not as prevalent.
It's
obvious reasons.
It's far less, and it's and the like 1 in 100 people who take it way too far are far fewer, right?
Yeah, well,
a woman raping a man is like, I don't know, what, 1 in a million versus 1 in 100 or something.
I don't think it's that far, dude. To be honest,
really,
I think it's more common than you think.
A lot more common than you think, dude. I know a lot of, let's say,
women raping
powerful. Men? Not that doesn't. Okay.
When I was 14,
objectifying men.
When I was 14,
and taking advantage of
my first sex experience was coerced, and there was a huge power dynamic. She was 16, and she was really big, and I was really small, and she coerced me into sex, and it was as close as I've ever been to a rape experience. It was not rape, but it was coercion. Absolutely. I said no many times. And it was a totally traumatizing experience. I didn't have sex again until college. And,
dude.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been there. I know it does happen, but
dude,
I know the statistics are, I don't actually have them like where I can just pull them up, but I know for a vague fact that the statistics are like, I don't know, what, 95-5 or something like that.
Well, there's 3 guys on this Zoom call, and what you described happened to 2 of us. And one, 16, I was 9, dude. All right. It was pretty fucking young. I'm revealing a lot here, but and it was someone who was older, obviously, and it turned many years later, after the trauma has already done its due, turns out I didn't know at the time, but she was molested by her father, by her stepfather. Mm-hmm. So that's what caused the whole thing to happen in the first place. A dude. Back to dudes, but the thing is acknowledging the grievance and what do you do? Yeah, I mean, what do we do about the dynamics? Well, the thing is to go into every situation respecting the human for who they are, regardless of where they came from, and know their boundaries. I've talked about the platinum rule. I don't know if I've talked about it here, actually. The golden rule versus the platinum rule. Have I talked about that, Peter, Lucas?
I don't think so.
We've got the golden rule, treat people like how they want to be treated. Right? And that seems like gold, right? To me, the
golden rule is actually, just to clarify, treat others the way you would want them to treat you.
Right. Sure. That's, yeah.
But it's different, right? Because treat others the way they want to be treated is actually like a step further, right?
That is the platinum rule. Excuse me, I stated the platinum rule first.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Exactly. Right. That's like the next level, because then you're actually understanding the other, and and treating them by their.
In turn, there's responsibility for us to tell people how we want to be treated. And this is something we don't teach humans in general, is how to show people how we want to be treated, and have a firm, but not, I actually heard Eckhart Tolle talking about this yesterday, but have a firm no when it's needed, and mean it, and, and honestly, but yeah, man. Again, this gets really tricky when it's a power dynamic, like you're talking about with whoever this person is.
100%. 100% on both of those, and there's no easy way through, right? Natalie, what are you feeling right now? I'm really curious when we get to this, because the implication is like, you could do something differently, right? Like you could state how you want to be treated. You could, whatever, tell somebody clearly, like, this is my boundary, whatever. but also there's an acknowledgement of a power dynamic that makes it really hard, especially at 21, being in a scene with people twice and 3 times your age, and as a woman, a woman, most of the time isolated in terms of your gender on the bandstand. Everybody else is men. So I don't know. What are your feelings here? Does you feel like I can imagine it would feel like uncomfortable and kind of like you're in a catch-22 a little bit.
Yeah, and honestly, when I'm in those situations, and most of the time in general, I'm just so like numb to it. I don't feel personally for myself a need to say to someone to stop treating me this certain way. But like for other women, I definitely feel it. It's just like I'm so caught up in just because I'm like the only like woman there. I'm just kind of caught up in what their world is instead of like mine. And I guess what that does is that now it's like I've been doubting a lot of the musicians I just like play with normally, because now like I know some of them to be pretty, like if they were in this conversation right now, they would probably think we're all like snowflake pussies of the new generation. And it's just like it's definitely like isolating. It feels defeating.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
I feel like I have to hide a part of myself in order to like be safe and accepted, and like I have to have my guard up. And I feel like not everyone has to be like that. Like that person who's twice my age, I don't think they have to have their guard up like that when they're playing. Or
there's well, I almost used the privileged word, but yeah, there's a certain amount of
that is privilege,
status, and privilege from status, if you will, I guess, in this particular situation. But an abuse of power, common term, huh? A lot of abuse of power from all over the place, honestly. Power corrupts people.
Identified the problem, but again, it's like how do we help shift this?
I think the first step is to stop shaming people when they do want to like put people on the spot and ask for something to change, because I think in the community, at least in my head, in the community, they would not take that seriously. They would probably think of the person who called the other person out kind of like a pussy, and just like, and even if they did change their actions, their mindset behind it would not change at all. It would not be helpful for that. They would just be kind of keeping it inside.
Yeah, well, I think people like that need something that's unexpected to jar them out of their comfortableness. The thing is, we're not all capable of doing that. That's the tough thing. We don't all have the wit and the, perhaps, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but the ability to do, especially because we're emotionally triggered in the moment, and that's working against us to really to have an effective
response, intervention.
An effective response. But I have, of course, we always think of the best responses after this, after the situation's over. I'm thinking of some damn good responses to whoever this person is right now. But I can imagine also in the moment and be like, but dude, I guess it's easy for a 40-year-old dude who's been through, a lot of shit, almost death half the time because of my health, to have the courage to be like, I don't give a fuck what you think. I'm going to state, you can think I'm a snowflake dressed in black with dreads all you want to. For me, I'm always going to try to bring some humor and try to embarrass the shit out of them Honestly, that's my approach, because
Humor.
regular responses don't seem to really do anything to people. And the humor is really important. To me, humor is the sugar that helps the medicine go down. If it's just vicious without any humor, I think that ends up backfiring on yourself, I think. Because then I don't think it's, I try not to be super angry. I mean, and when we were talking about politics, it's really difficult for me not to be angry. I have to add some kind of humor to it, because I will really be dark. Like, just anyway. So, you know, this person, you said, you said something, what was, or this person, who's really the fucking snowflake, honestly, in
They
that
are, for
situation,
sure.
you know?
They are.
It's like, so being, if, so that, again, in the moment may be tough, but like, you can't take a compliment from a girl. I mean, not saying that girls are, I'm just saying, just, I try to think of humans as humans, and all the other identity categorizations are far second place to me. But yeah, you can't even, who's a snowflake here? Yeah, you can't even take whatever it is. I'm not wording it correctly because I haven't thought about it, but this is why I listen to comedians, because sometimes if you listen to them all the time, then these things come quicker. I'm thinking, well, I'm thinking of the wrong comedian at this point, but I can think of some very sharp-mouthed comedians that would handle this with. Look at the ones who are great at handling hecklers. Those are the ones that can, really take the shit out of any situation. And like, there's not many who are great with hecklers, but anyway, that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
With
Lucas?
more comedy, like comedians have a unique place in culture because they can really, and now like now there's a little more pressure because of just people being canceled, and you have to really watch what you say.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think comedians have this opportunity to kind of call out things in culture that really suck and make fun of it. And I think people listen, respond, resonate with it to the point where they can really kind of effectually instigate change in the culture because they're calling this shit out and people are listening to them and laughing, and it's a lighthearted way to kind of deal with these touchy things. So I fully agree that through laughter and comedy, maybe that would be a good way to kind of address this on like the macro level, because comedians really appeal to lots and lots of people, so people can subtly, subliminally be re-educated, I guess, through comedy.
Again, and again, I think if someone who needs to be jarred can be embarrassed, even at the expense of, other people around, even taking part into how ridiculous they are, helps, I think. Yeah, maybe in the moment, maybe for a week or two, their butt hurt, but I think it will be clear over the course of the next week or whatever amount of time that, yeah, I'm being a dick, I'm being a jerk. There's clearly an inability to put that person's self into someone else's perspective, and even harder for them to put themselves in the perspective of a woman.
Yeah, which is the power of theoretically of that nonviolent communication thing, right? Where you say actually how you feel, not what you feel the other person is doing or being, but rather how you feel. Like when you said this, I felt, like uncomfortable. I felt ashamed. I felt, whatever, angry. I felt kind of upset, etc. Right. Anyway, Natalie, really appreciate you having this conversation with us. And this is a huge can of worms, obviously. and you open a can of worms and it just goes like that. And so it's very hard to, to like figure out everything. And that's not the point of this podcast. The point of this podcast is that the problem is this, and the problem is that. And we, oftentimes you start talking about one problem and you wind up getting into another one and another one. And there's not per se like a clear answer or solution to any of these problems, so much as we believe that having these conversations publicly, albeit risky and requiring a certain amount of courage and vulnerability, is part of the solution in the macro and the micro. Is having these conversations publicly. So thank you so much for joining us. And I know we gotta call it because Lucas has to go teach, but we just want to give you the floor for any last thing you want to say.
I guess this has been pretty refreshing. I mean, I don't usually try and bring this stuff up like when I'm at a gig or with my fellow musicians, but it was nice to hear your guys' perspective for sure, and it feels pretty validating and not as like, I don't feel as jaded and like disappointed anymore,
Yeah. I've learned a lot from this conversation myself, because sometimes when I see the solutions going awry, it's hard to, there's a lot of issues in this, and there are differences between those issues. Anyway, I learned a lot from this conversation. Honestly, I don't. It was very helpful for me. And as I've said, I just want to say, as I've said before, as we know, as we're exemplifying, conversations have to happen whether or not they're preceded by a war. And to get to any kind of common ground, any kind of solution, it's got to come through conversation. And thank you. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your story and your perspective.
Yeah, super grateful to have you, and hopefully we'll keep these kinds of conversations going. Love to have you back.
Yeah, for sure.
Talk to us about other things. We kind of cover a whole, as you know, I sent you like a list of all the things we talked about. So, and hopefully, I don't know if you guys are up for it, but in the future, it'd be great to have lots of different perspectives. So, a bunch of different people on to join Dana, Peter, and myself. So, yeah, very blessed to have you on, Natalie. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Take care. Thank you so much.
All right, Lucas.
Great to meet you, Natalie.
Gig, dude.
Bye.
Take care, guys.